Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a wonderful holiday season. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. So, I was in the gym this week and thinking back along my entire fitness journey of now around 10 to 15 years, if not more. And because I have such a bad memory, it's very hard for me to have very specific memories of moments along that journey. There's only a few really specific moments that I remember as kind of the critical landmarks across my entire history of getting into fitness and getting stronger. And one of those is back in 2017, I was living in New York City and working in the financial district. And I went to a very, very small CrossFit gym there that could only hold about 8 people at a time max. And there's this one day when I was going in, and at this point, I'd been doing CrossFit for maybe 2 or 3 years. Um, but there's this one day that I remember very clearly that I went into this really tiny CrossFit gym, and the workout was basically getting a max 1 rep clean and jerk. And if that means nothing to you, the clean and jerk is a movement where you basically load a barbell with pretty heavy weight. The challenge is to get it as heavy as possible in this case, and you kind of lift it from the ground to overhead in two motions. First of all, you lift it from the ground to your shoulders, and then you lift it from your shoulders to overhead with your arms locked out. And you don't need to know the specifics. All you need to know is that it's a very quick movement and you can basically lift very heavy weight once you get the technique down. Now, at this time, I was kind of an intermediate in my CrossFit journey. I had made a lot of progress, but I still didn't feel fully confident in these skills. I wasn't even sure if I had the proper form, if I had the proper timing. But because our gym was so small and there were only about 5 or 6 of us who showed up that morning, my coach had us go through one by one and each do a clean and jerk, adding weight each round while he gave us feedback and everyone else was watching. So we would kind of go around the room. We were all arranged in kind of a circle or a square. And one by one, he would have us do a clean and jerk. He would videotape it and then give feedback to that person and the entire class and suggest a weight that they go up to after. So at this time, I had never clean and jerked more than the equivalent of maybe 120, 130 pounds. And that was where I figured I would end up on this day. So started off gradually, maybe 80 pounds, 100 pounds, 120. And as we were going through, the coach would videotape me and then he would say, "Look, this is a sign that Michelle's got the timing down, like she's got the right technique. Look how easy the weight is going up. She can do a lot more." So that day he kept pushing me to put more and more weight on the bar. I was getting close to 130 pounds, and that was where I knew in my head that I was going to stop and I was going to max out because I knew that was a very heavy weight for me at the time. But instead of suggesting that I go from 120 to 130, he had me go from 120 straight up to 140 pounds. And then that round, I was able to lift the weight the same way. I was surprised. I was happy. I PR'd that movement. But then, surprisingly, he told me to go up again and he pushed the weight all the way up to 155 pounds, which was more than what I weighed at the time. And just the concept of me lifting more weight than my body weight was terrifying to me. I thought my arms were going to snap and I would not be able to support that weight overhead. But lo and behold, I mean, this was getting towards the end of the class. The whole class was getting pumped and excited and cheering me on. I was able to just focus, get the number out of my head, and then do the same thing I'd been doing so far up until that point on the previous rounds. And miraculously, the 155 pounds went overhead and I locked it out. And I set a new personal record for that lift that was 25 pounds heavier than what I'd ever done before. And I'm telling this story because I think it is significant that it is one of few moments that I remember from my fitness career. It was a moment that kind of exemplified what was going on inside my head this whole time, not just that day, but over years previous to that. And it is kind of this pattern where I tended to underestimate myself. And that underestimation, that lack of confidence was the barrier to me being able to perform at the level that I was physically capable of performing at. That day, today, I want to talk about the significance of building a habit of going to the gym and figuring out on my journey, as well as seeing clients figure out on their individual journeys, that it ends up having a lot deeper meaning and purpose than just trying to build your body and look a certain way. I never thought I could clean and jerk my body weight. And I don't think that anyone entered that room on that PR day knowing how much they were capable of putting overhead. But with all of the consistent training, they found out, and they found out what they were capable of. And I think in that way, the gym and fitness is kind of an analogy for life. You're not going to be tested every single day to your full capacity. But if you keep showing up and you keep having that consistent effort towards progress, then one day when a challenge is thrown at you, when you do face a test, you will surprise yourself with how much you're capable of. And to me, I kind of knew this in a different context at the time because I grew up more so focused on academic achievement than physical fitness. So the area that I was comfortable applying this concept is with school and with work. As a Chinese American, what you are taught as a child is to keep practicing over and over and over again until you know certain concepts like the back of your hand. Like in primary school, in elementary school, you're given these workbooks, for instance, to practice your addition, subtraction, multiplication. I would fly through those workbooks, and my parents would buy full on textbooks of hundreds of more problems for me to do at home and over the summer. So, compared to the other kids, I was doing the same material, but I was just getting a lot more repetition, like hundreds more reps on every single concept. And that's why math was so easy to me. And I understood this because my parents taught me from a very early age this concept within the practice of schoolwork. I put in the work, I spent the time doing things, I elevated the level of challenge gradually so that it was something that challenged me, but yet was doable until I got better and better and better. And I always had a lot of confidence in that realm. It was also, I think, a product of the way I grew up and how I grew up, that I was kind of pigeonholed as one of the few Asian American students at school to be a nerd because that was what everyone else expected of me. They would look at me and just assume Michelle's good at math because she's Asian, and that was the Asian stereotype. So growing up, in addition to having the process of practice and having all this time and energy and attention dedicated to school, I also had this external expectation that I would be good at school. And that drove me as well because I wanted to live up to that expectation. And because it was expected of me, that almost proved to me that that would be a goal that was possible for me. In contrast to that, I was never expected to be an athlete. Actually, the absolute complete opposite. Even in very early in elementary school, I'm talking like first, second grade, like 6 years old, I was always going to be the last one picked for teams in PE class because I was seen as an Asian nerd who had no coordination, no athleticism. No one wanted me on their team because of those expectations and the way they perceived me. So over time, I kind of internalized this because it started so young, where my entire life I participated in team sports, but I never pushed myself to do that well because the ceiling that I saw for myself was just so low. I didn't think it was possible. I had no encouragement to do better. And I didn't see anyone who looked like me doing better in that realm either. So, to go back to this nerd identity I assumed, I think it really set in for me when I was in high school because the social hierarchy there is so clear cut. You're either going to be good at sports or you're going to be good at school, or you're going to be some variation of some area of those two things. That's when I started sacrificing my sleep and my health to go to a school that was located really far away in a more prestigious, high income district where I would be challenged a lot. And I took a ton of IB classes, did a lot of extracurriculars that were all related to academics, and basically went all in on school. And at the same time, I think this was the time when I started really developing negative body image or being aware of how my body looked and felt and seeing those negative consequences play out. Because I was putting so much pressure on myself academically and on my schedule, and I didn't really have a good outlet for that stress, that was when I started eating to deal with stress. And that was when I also started gaining weight, both because I was a developing adolescent, but also because I was staying up late at night snacking while scrambling to finish assignments for school. On a lot of nights, I would basically stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning, knowing that I had to wake up before 6 a.m. the next day to make an hour-long commute to my high school. And that was how it proceeded all 4 years. During that time, I developed a really negative habit around food where I was using food as a coping mechanism for stress. And I knew it wasn't right because I could feel the physical impact on my body. I knew I was gaining weight. I was feeling more sluggish. I wasn't eating as many foods that were high in nutrients, but rather foods that were high in sugar and fat and calories. I would especially go for a ton of carby snacks like cereals, PB&J sandwiches, baked goods, bread. Those would be the things that I would get down at night. They would get me that rush of sugar I needed for that brain power, especially being so sleep deprived at the time. And knowing this and seeing my body changes at the same time, I started feeling this immense guilt for my behaviors because I knew deep down that I was contributing to my poor health and also to the way I looked. It's important to note that the rich district I went to school in was Boulder, Colorado, where not only are people very privileged, but they are also very fit. It is a place where there's a high emphasis on exercise, especially outdoorsy endurance exercise. So the beauty standard at my school, even above what was average for the country, was basically skinny white girl. That was how everybody looked. Everyone was into like running long distance, hiking, skiing, biking, like all of those activities. They were very active, very fit. And at the same time, I was the student who had fallen into these very sedentary habits with occasional binge eating at night. And I wasn't even officially classified as overweight. But I remember from the perspectives of my peers and my parents, I was definitely getting there. I was definitely looking very chubby and pudgy compared to my peers at that time. And my parents, they didn't hesitate to make it known. And I did kind of try to address my lifestyle many times. I knew that it was a matter of calories in versus calories out. So this is when I kind of picked up an exercise habit as well as joined a sports team. I played lacrosse for a few years, as well as tried as much as I could with the little I knew to refine and fix my diet. My diet at the time was eating whatever either my parents had prepared or what was available at the school, but the main issue was this nighttime excess eating. And for a period of time, for maybe a week at a time, I was able to address that. I would basically go online on Tumblr or MySpace or whatever we had back then and find inspiration of skinny girls that I wanted to look like. And then that would motivate me to eat less and to stop binging for maybe a few days to a week. But it never lasted longer than that. And now looking back, I understand why, but in the moment, I really didn't. I would keep going back and forth on why can't I just stick to a healthy diet? Why can't I eat like these girls in my class who have salads all the time and are skinny and pretty and popular? I did not know why I could not maintain that diet, even though I could do it for a few days. And it would always end up in me losing my willpower, messing up, and just getting out of control at night. Now, of course, I understand the psychology and the physiology of what I call the binge restrict cycle. Now I know that when you over restrict, your body starts firing more hunger signals and forces you to compensate for that later on, which ends up in overeating. And then this is why we have kind of the yo yo back and forth. But yes, back then I didn't understand, just didn't think I could stick to a diet, eventually gave up, submitted to my identity as being kind of the chubby, nerdy Asian, and that for a while. Strangely enough, the only pattern I really discovered is that when I wasn't trying so hard to lose weight, that was when the weight loss would happen. So I thought that if I had just applied more focus and effort to it, that I would be able to lose weight. But actually, when I was able to do it most sustainably and most naturally was when I would go off on a vacation or I would have a break from school. And some of that stress, that pressure would be relieved from my life for maybe a week or two at a time. And I wasn't even thinking about food. I wasn't even thinking about my body. But when I would weigh myself after, that's when I discovered I would lose weight. So it was this contradictory thing of like, why is this happening when I'm not even thinking about it? But why is it so hard for me when that is my focus? So I think the missing ingredient here is just that I was in it for the wrong reasons. I was trying to get this superficial outcome of having a more attractive body, feeling more confident about myself, getting rid of these bad habits that were weighing me down and holding me back. But that wasn't really a powerful enough reason. I was missing the aspect of that that was really more about self care, self confidence, and identity. I didn't identify as someone who was healthy. I didn't identify as someone who had a reason to take care of herself like that. So I was never able to completely commit to it. It was always kind of this temporary intervention from what was my normal life at the time. And that's why it didn't stick. So I said at the very beginning of this that I don't remember too many important moments or milestones from my fitness journey, but one of the things that I do remember is, and this is another one of those landmark moments for me, it's when running started to make sense. And this is important because after high school, when I went to college, I really didn't have any opportunities to play sports anymore. So the only mode of exercise that I felt was accessible to me at the time, since I did not know my way around a gym, was running. And by junior year, I'd moved into an apartment off campus where in the backyard there were tons of trails. My college was in the middle of the woods. There were hundreds of acres of land behind us, and I decided I would take up trail running. Part of my motivation was the same. It was to burn some calories, get in shape. That goal was always like kind of flip-flopping in the back of my mind. But another part of it was I really wanted to be outside in nature. That was what made me happy at the time. So I took up trail running. And at first, again, I didn't have very much confidence in my abilities as a runner. I would maybe only go for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. Then, as soon as I started feeling tired, I would start walking and head back home. It wasn't until I found this book, and I don't even remember what the book was called, but it was just a basic book about running. I found this book that explained to me in very clear terms that in order to get better at running longer distances, you have to run slower. And this was very counterintuitive to me at the time because during my lacrosse practices at school, during PE classes, we would always try to run either a mile or 2 miles as fast as possible. And that was the only exposure to running I had. I would come out of these mile and 2 mile distances feeling completely exhausted, burning out my lungs, burning out my legs. Like it was miserable. So I learned to associate running with that very uncomfortable feeling of basically maxing out. But this book, the one thing it kept pushing is that most people run way too fast for what they need in order to build their endurance and get better at running. This is pretty widely known nowadays. Back in 2012, I really didn't know this. I hadn't heard it from anyone, but it's basically the importance of zone two or endurance training. And so I decided because I read this book and it was compelling to actually try it out. So on my next run, I purposefully went out very, very slow. The guidance was a conversational pace, a pace at which you could hold a conversation comfortably. So I started talking to myself a little bit, making sure I was at that right pace. It felt like a walk, like it felt like I was barely even jogging, but that run was easy. It was a low effort run. I was able to go for much longer than half an hour. And afterwards, I felt great. I didn't feel like I was winded. I didn't feel like I was sore, didn't have to spend a lot of time recovering. And for the purposes of me having running as just a relaxing hobby to blow off steam and to be in nature, it worked perfectly. So I followed that running plan, and that was the first time I was independently very consistent with an exercise routine. Was following maybe a 2 or 3 month long running plan where it told me how long and how fast to run each day. And through that, I was able to get my maximum distance up from maybe 2 miles or so to all the way to 6 or 7 miles, taking just over an hour or so. And that was, I think, my first view, my first experience firsthand of how I could apply structure and consistency to fitness and actually see progress. It wasn't something that I had committed to trying with my body. I tried to push myself through it and eventually gave up. It was the first time I didn't really give up on myself in achieving a longer term fitness goal. So I continued with the trail running throughout junior and senior year of college, and I got pretty good at it. It was maybe because of this that after college, I had enough bravery and courage to actually start stepping into a gym. And this story was not so straightforward either. I worked nearby a CrossFit gym at the time in Virginia. And every day when I would go to work, I would drive past this gym and I would see people inside doing these really fun group workouts. They were doing all sorts of things, climbing ropes, throwing medicine balls against the wall, doing barbell movements, running around the block. It looked like a really fun experience. And it looked like there were just normal people in there. But I was still so insecure about my own skills and abilities that I did not have the will to even approach that gym for about 3 months or so. But finally, one day, after I'd been thinking about it a lot, I finally got the courage to step inside on a Saturday. I don't think a class was going on, so the owner and a couple of his friends were just hanging out by the front, doing little stretches, rolling out their muscles, something of that nature. And I just walked in, and I think what I said was, I have seen the workouts you do. I am intrigued. I want to try, but I'm nervous that I won't be fit enough to keep up with everyone else in the class." And to that, the owner said the nicest thing to me that did not expect at all. He said, "You will absolutely be able to keep up." He explained to me that the workouts could be scaled and taken at my own pace, but at the same time, he'd seen hundreds of people go in and out those gym doors, and just by looking at me, he could tell that I was fit enough and fitter than a lot of the existing membership to do CrossFit. And that is how I got started with CrossFit. The biggest thing I would say that CrossFit has contributed to me is it taught me to run my own race. It taught me to stop looking at everyone else, comparing to them, not feeling like I measured up, and just put my head down and focus on myself. If you know anything about CrossFit gyms and what they look like, you'll know that they don't have any mirrors. In your big box conventional gyms, the weight area is usually lined with mirrors all over the walls so people can kind of check out their own form as they work out. But in CrossFit, since it's small group classes and everything's supervised by a coach, they decided that the mirrors were doing more harm than good. People are paying more attention to how they look as they're working out than focusing on those internal cues that help them actually get the most output. They would say the appearance of your body doesn't matter as much as the function of your body or the output that you're able to put out. So, with that principle of CrossFit in mind, I think it really relieved one of the barriers and insecurities I had about how my body looked at that time. I still felt a little pudgy, a little overweight, like I didn't belong in a gym. And I know now that no one's really looking at you, but at the time, I just did not want to feel self conscious about my appearance. So, that was one thing. The other is everything in CrossFit is measured. So when you do a workout each day, your performance is either measured by the amount of weight you're able to do, the number of reps you're able to do, or the time in which you're able to complete a workout. So there's always some sort of metric of how well you are doing. And at first, I felt very conscious that my score for the workouts wasn't as high as anyone else in the class. I was dead last in my CrossFit classes when I first started out because I was still learning the movements and everything. I was still getting my fitness up to that level. That every time at the end of class, I would report my score. It would be written on the whiteboard. I would see everyone else's, and then I would be last. At first, I felt bad about this. I saw it more as a competition against the other members, but eventually I was able to learn through coaching and through the CrossFit methodology that number should mostly be compared to the past version of you rather than the current version of someone else. And once I was able to process that and take those metrics more towards like the uniqueness of my own body, my own history, my own abilities, and focus just on me, they became really, really valuable. Because the fact of the matter is, metrics and data really help measure progress, and progress is really motivating. So before, when I was just going to the gym on my own, kind of feeling out how much weight to do that specific day, but not having a specific goal for it and not tracking my progress over time, I didn't have that continuity between sessions. But now that I was in CrossFit, I knew exactly how much I could squat, how much I could bench, how fast I could run a mile. I had all these new benchmarks for how past me performed, and I became really competitive towards those benchmarks so I could get better and I could become a better version of myself. That focus on myself and that steady progress, that was the payoff from my consistency of showing up, going to classes, and putting forth my best effort. Similar to that running progression where I was shocked that just by showing up and running slowly and exerting very little effort, I could get better at running. It was very similar here where I would just show up to CrossFit classes. At first, I didn't think too deeply about them. I just showed up, did my best, did the best I could that day with everything else that was going on. But eventually, in my record book, in the app where I logged all these numbers, I could see myself getting stronger, and that was really encouraging and really motivating. So for the first time, or maybe the second time rather, I felt like I had control over the outcomes. I had control over the physical outcomes of what I was doing, and I could feel my body changing, not necessarily in how it looked, but what it was capable of, and that was something that I could feel really proud of. So, in short, it's different for everyone, but the gym, I thoroughly, genuinely believe that the gym does build more than just a body. For everyone involved, everyone who's showing up day after day after day for years at a time, I guarantee you they have a deeper motivation and a deeper purpose to showing up at the gym and exercising regularly for that period of time than just looking good. Aesthetic goals are important. I'm not going to be the person to deny that. Everyone wants to feel comfortable in their own body. They want to modify how they look. They want to look fit and toned. Like, that's desirable for most people, and it's very hard to deny that. So, yes, that is important, and that's the surface level goal. But over time, as you do it more and more, there's just so much more to it than appearance that it's not the only thing on the table. And I think for a lot of people, the benefit of exercise is that self trust, that self investment, and knowing that you are doing something good for yourself, you're investing in yourself, and that's going to help you feel more confident and more capable. And that is going to extend to every area of life. I'm talking socially, professionally, mentally, and emotionally. You're going to build that physical strength first, but that mental and emotional strength is going to follow because you dedicated yourself to that effort and because you've proven to yourself that by showing up, your effort is paying off. That translates to many other realms of life. For me personally, I told you that I wasn't feeling confident in myself in high school and college. When I initially emerged as a young adult, I would still hesitate to showing up at social events. I still had that feeling that I didn't want to be seen. I just wanted to disappear because no one wanted to look at me or socialize with me or interact with me. I had that feeling that I was like ugly and awkward and I wouldn't be able to fit in. I had hesitancy when it came to dating. I didn't think that any man would want to be with me, and I lowered my standards because of that. And even though I was very confident in my academic abilities, I still had hesitancy to take up opportunities professionally because in the professional world, your success is so much more based off of relationships than what your output is. And I had trouble making those work relationships happen because I lacked confidence in myself. Even though I had confidence in my abilities, I lacked confidence in myself because I didn't like how I looked. I didn't like how I treated my body. I didn't like how I felt day in and day out, how I had low energy and low self esteem. So the gym didn't fix everything. There's more that goes into that, but it fixed a lot. I want to say it didn't fix everything directly because I got fitter and then I started looking objectively better, but more so, I think it fixed a lot of things for my life and opened up a lot of doors because it gave me that sense of competence and confidence that I was missing from other areas. It's kind of different from academics. I told you that I've always had that confidence there, that I've always exerted myself and applied myself and was able to reap those rewards of being like smart. But it's not the same because that was what I had and that was the expectation I've had my whole life. But being able to go from being someone who perceived herself as awkward and unfit and incapable to someone who could actually do things with proof that proved that I was strong and fast and I could get better and I could really invest in becoming fitter. That gave me a ton of confidence in myself because it proved to myself that I could do something that I didn't think was possible before. And as long as I kept up with it, I could continue doing things, continue having these new accomplishments, and feel really good over something that I had control over that wasn't all about school or work. So it changed the whole game for me. It kind of set the framework for me to be able to go out and do bigger things with my life. It set the framework for me to feel comfortable talking to people, forming new relationships, building bridges that got me to where I am now. Really, I just cannot express how important it is to build that self belief and that self trust and continue the behaviors that maintain it over time. So nowadays, when a new client walks in the door for me, I often see a younger version of myself walk in. It isn't every time, but sometimes I will see younger me walk in because that client will come to me and they will just despair that they don't like how they look, that they don't feel like they have the motivation or willpower to pick themselves up and do what they know they need to do. And they're looking for some sort of inspiration. They're looking for me to strike that match and light them up. I have to tell people at this point that motivation is not what they think it is, that willpower is not what they think it is. I have to tell them that from my experience and from what I know, those things don't last. And those things aren't something innate in you that is missing. The truth is, and this is one of the most important things I've learned, is that motivation often follows action. And the challenge is in trying to change your life, change your routines, change your habits, you have to selectively choose actions that you can perform consistently that you know will pay off. So rather than someone coming in saying that they want to lose weight or they have some sort of fitness goal and they just need to look at more magazines and more online posts and more models to motivate them to be like someone else, I try to reorient them. I try to help them come up with something, some small action that they can commit to, that they can do even on days when they don't want to, in order to start driving that momentum. Because once you start, just like with school, just like with running, just like with CrossFit, once you start committing yourself to doing something small that feels easy, but you do it repeatedly over and over and over again, you will eventually get results, and those results will be the motivation you need to continue. But it just doesn't work the other way around. There's no amount of inspiration you can view that will be enough fuel to get you across the finish line of your goal. You have to actually act. And that is what I would tell my younger self is even if you don't believe you're an athlete, you don't have to believe you're an athlete. You just have to decide it is important for me to move my body. So I'm going to find a way to be out in nature and move my body regularly. And I'm not even going to think about where I could be 5 or 10 years down the line. I'm not going to even think about these dramatic changes that take years to surface. I'm just going to think about what I can do tomorrow that I know will make me one step closer and make me feel good. And then I'm going to do that over and over and over again. That is just how it works. The thing is, everyone wants a radical transformation. Everyone wants this transformation of whether it be self love or a hotter body or something else. They want some sort of identity transformation. And when we want something like that, it's very easy to fall back into the habits of just reading motivational quotes. If I just think about loving myself enough, then maybe I will love myself. If I just follow people who love themselves and proclaim it on social media, maybe I will develop that self love if I just kind of keep thinking it. But that's not how it happens. The truth of the matter is, identity transformation is very, very slow. And it's something kind of like my initial weight loss goal process, where like I found that when I was ignoring that goal is when I was progressing towards it the most. You kind of have to ignore those big, lofty, identity-focused goals in the present in order to eventually progress towards them. Because if you put a ton of pressure on getting yourself to somewhere where you don't feel like you deserve to be, where you don't feel like is natural, then that pressure just ends up coming out as guilt of falling short and not being able to get there. Whereas if you just focus on small things that feel manageable, that you can control, that identity transformation will happen in the background. So I think my advice to younger me and to everyone out there would be this: try your best to be okay and appreciate who you are right now. Don't try to force yourself to be someone who you're not, but rather find small things that pay off day by day. Small things that give you some sense of progress, that give you some sense of pride, that give you some sense of calmness within yourself, and continue doing the things that work. If they stop working, throw them out, do something new, but try to stick with something for at least a few months consistently and hold yourself to it before you make that decision. And with enough iterations of that, you will eventually become the person who you're meant to be. Not because someone else told you you should be there, not because you expect yourself to be there, but because that is the person who you are meant to be, who is already at the core of you, the person that you just have to nourish through your daily actions. It's been said many times, I don't need to say it many more, but focusing on the process and not the outcome is the key to success for a lot of people. And in this time of year when we are all coming up with New Year's resolutions, trying to figure out how to take this big leap from where we are to where we want to be, and putting all this pressure on ourselves, it's important to take a step back and think about it in those terms. Stop fixating on an eventual outcome that may or may not happen and start thinking about, what is the next step forward? What do I want to do tomorrow and the day after that? With that, Happy New Year, and I hope 2026 gets off to a great start for you.